The quiet suburban neighborhood of Riverside, California, was shattered on November 25, 2022, when Virginia State Trooper Austin Lee Edwards murdered 3 members of the Winnick family in cold blood. Edwards gained entry to their home under false pretenses, posing as a detective to get close to his victims. Edwards shot dead 69-year-old Mark Winnick, his 65-year-old wife Sherry, and their 38-year-old daughter Brooke, execution style. After setting fire to the house to cover his tracks, Edwards kidnapped the Winnick's 15-year-old granddaughter and fled in his car. A massive police manhunt ensued across state lines to find Edwards and rescue the kidnapped girl. The horrific crimes capped a cross-country stalking scheme that began online. Edwards, a former Virginia State Trooper, had catfished the teenage girl on social media while pretending to be a 17-year-old boy. After months of online interaction, he drove over 2,500 miles from his home in Virginia to California to kidnap her. The Winnick family's nightmare began at around 9 a.m. on the morning of November 25th. Sherry Winnick answered a knock at the front door to find Edwards dressed in tactical gear and claiming to be a detective, sent to speak urgently with her 15-year-old granddaughter. Edwards claimed he needed to question the girl about inappropriate messages and photos exchanged online. Sherry's daughter, Michelle Blandon, was on the phone with her mother when Edwards arrived. Blandon recounted hearing her mother's panicked voice, explaining the supposed detective's sudden appearance. To avoid involving her younger granddaughter, Sherry asked if the girl could go to Blandon's house during the questioning. Edwards insisted both girls' phones be brought along and that the 15-year-old remain in his car. Blandon grew suspicious when Edwards took the phone from her mother and avoided giving her his name, simply saying, "Everything is going to be okay." After the call ended, Blandon tried to follow up with her mother, but got no response. Meanwhile, Edwards entered the home and murdered Mark, Sherry, and Brooke Winnick, execution style. Police believe he then set fire to the house in an attempt to cover up the killings. Edwards fled the burning home with the kidnapped teenager in his car. A neighbor had seen Edwards earlier approach the girl and open the car door where she sat. Later, the neighbor stated that she saw the teen mouth, "Help me," from the car. The Riverside police were immediately dispatched at around 11 a.m. when they got a call about a young girl who seemed distressed while getting into a red Kia Soul with an unidentified man, who later was found to be Edwards. While officers were responding to the scene, police began to receive calls about a fire just a few houses away. By now, police had also been alerted by the fire and neighbors who saw the distraught girl with Edwards. A massive manhunt ensued to find the vehicle and rescue the kidnapped teenager from her abductor. Several agonizing hours later, authorities were able to track down Edwards' red Kia in Kelso, an unincorporated area of San Bernardino County, as he drove the kidnapped girl through the remote desert town. When police vehicles finally converged on the wanted car, Edwards reacted violently and began firing shots at the officers in a desperate last stand, finding himself surrounded by law enforcement vehicles. Realizing his time was up, Edwards took his own life with a self-inflicted gunshot. Thankfully, despite Edwards' violent efforts to the very end, the kidnapped teenage girl was recovered unharmed from the vehicle he had abducted her hours earlier. In the aftermath, a disturbing history of Edwards' mental illness and violence emerged. The 28-year-old had a long pattern of manipulating underage girls online to send him explicit photos. A victim who first interacted with Edwards as a 13-year-old has now come forward to share her story. The woman, now 21, met Edwards in 2014 on a chat platform when he was 20, and she was just 13. Edwards was aware of her young age, referencing her being in school and going trick-or-treating, yet he still pressured her to send nude photos and video chat with him in a sexual manner. Edwards' messages with the woman, which she provided to media outlets, show his mood swinging wildly between declaring love and issuing violent threats. He would often allude to suicide if she did not comply with demands for more photos. In early 2016, the woman tried to cut off contact with Edwards after 2 years of manipulation. Days later, Edwards had a mental breakdown where he cut himself with a hatchet and threatened to kill his father. The woman believes this incident was triggered by her rejecting him after being involuntarily committed and having his firearms rights revoked. Edwards lied to the girl about what happened. Records show he was barred from owning guns after the suicide threat, making his later work in law enforcement even more alarming. For years after, Edwards continued contacting the underage girl obsessively from new accounts after she had blocked him. His persistence terrified her, as she had never revealed her real identity. Edwards' twisted history of abusing vulnerable minors remained hidden as he became a Virginia State Trooper in 2021. After resigning, he was hired again as a deputy in Washington County, Virginia, just weeks before murdering the Winnecks in California. The woman who endured Edwards' manipulation as a young teen said seeing his face in reports of the Riverside killings made her sick. It confirmed her worst fears about the man who had stalked her online for years. Sadly, Edwards was able to charm his way into law enforcement despite giant red flags. Colleagues later expressed shock that such an evil and wicked person could infiltrate their ranks. A deeper background came to light on Edwards as family and authorities tried to understand how he could commit such an atrocity. Signs of mental illness and violence emerged that were ignored in his brief law enforcement career. Edwards was hired as a deputy in Washington County, Virginia, just weeks before the murders, despite alarms in his past. He had recently quit his job at the Virginia State Police after just 9 months of working. This was also when he failed a psychological exam, which was allegedly buried on purpose by Washington County. Court records also showed Edwards was barred from owning firearms due to a 2016 incident where he was involuntarily committed to a mental institution. He had attempted suicide and threatened to kill his father. Yet despite these giant red flags, Edwards was able to pass screening and get hired for a new law enforcement job in Washington County. Tragically, officials there either overlooked or ignored his very recent history of mental health crisis and unfitness for duty. The Winnick family contends these missteps by Virginia authorities directly enabled Edwards' killing spree. In May 2023, they filed a $100 million lawsuit alleging negligence in his hiring. The family lawyers argue proper safeguards to screen troubled officers could have prevented 3 innocent deaths. While the legal action proceeds, those close to the Winnicks try to cope with the sudden, painful tragedy. Mark, Sherry, and Brooke were beloved family members active in the Riverside community. Mark Winnick was a high school sports coach who mentored countless student athletes over 25 years. Neighbors fondly remember seeing him walk through the local parks and trails. Sherry Winnick was known for her generosity, baking sweets for charity and advocating for the disabled. Their daughter Brooke was a single mother, devoted to her 2 teenage daughters. She worked as a restaurant manager while supporting her girls' passions like color guard. For Brooke's children, losing their mother and grandparents is a trauma beyond words. The heartbroken Riverside community has come together to honor the Winnick family while mourning the loss of 3 of its most beloved members. Local schools held vigils and dedicated events to mark Winnick's legacy. The family's church hosted overflowing grief counseling sessions for shocked community members. At nearby Arlington High School, Mark Winnick's coaching colleagues lamented losing such a cherished friend who was like a father figure to students. The school retired his jersey number and named the football field after him, an honor that classmates say would have embarrassed the humbled coach. By honoring the Winnick's memory, perhaps some good can emerge from this inconceivable tragedy. Their family's lawsuits aim to incite reform in how law enforcement screens for unstable recruits so that no other department unwittingly arms and empowers a dangerous predator. It is a bittersweet legacy, but one that can help prevent future senseless violence.